I'm Natalie Carter, 30 years old, and 3 years ago, I walked away from a family that never saw me. I built a company, a life I loved far from their whispers and judgment. But when I got that invitation to Grandma's 80th birthday, everything I had fought for was at risk. My sister thought hiring a private investigator would expose my failure. She had no idea what he would really find. If you've ever felt like the black sheep, keep watching. I thought I had finally escaped the noise of my family when I moved to Austin. 3 years of building a quiet, steady life with no unexpected knocks on my door. 3 years without the constant edge in my mother's voice or the fake sweet smiles from my sister Sabrina. But that morning the envelope was sitting in my mailbox heavier than it should have been. Cream paper, elegant cursive, my name spelled out in my mother's handwriting. I stood there, keys still in my hand, the Texas sun warming the back of my neck as I stared at the envelope that could ruin the peace I had fought for. I walked back inside, closing the door softly so it wouldn't echo in the loft. The kitchen smelled like coffee, and Ethan was at the counter typing something on his laptop, glasses slipping down his nose. He looked up and smiled, that soft smile that reminded me I was safe here. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward the envelope in my hand. I didn't answer right away. My hands were shaking a little as I tore it open, unfolding the thick card inside. My eyes caught the words before I could stop them. Celebrating June Carter's 80th birthday, I sat down at the table, the chair cold against my legs. Ethan stood closing his laptop, moving toward me, concern crossing his face. "It's from them, isn't it?" I nodded, placing the invitation on the table between us. The gold lettering shimmered under the morning light, mocking me. I pressed my palms against my thighs to stop them from shaking. "It's for Grandma's birthday," I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. "She's turning 80. Ethan leaned back against the counter, folding his arms. "Are you thinking of going?" I didn't answer. Instead, my eyes drifted to the small framed photo of me and Grandma June on the shelf, taken years ago at a summer fair when she insisted I try the funnel cake even though Mom said it was too messy. She had been the only person who told me I was good enough, even when I came home crying after Sabrina got another award and I got silence. "I don't know," I finally said, staring at the card again. "I haven't seen them in 3 years, Ethan." He nodded slowly. "But you miss her?" I swallowed, a tight knot forming in my throat. "I do. But I can't handle them. Not again." Ethan moved closer, sliding the invitation aside, taking my hand in his. His hands were warm, steady, grounding me in the present. "This is your choice, Nat. You know that, right? No one can force you to go." I nodded again, but my chest felt heavy. I could still hear my mother's voice, sharp and cold, telling me I was selfish for moving to Austin. That I was throwing away everything the family built for me. I could see Sabrina's smirk, the way she would toss her hair back and call me dramatic. But then there was Grandma's voice, softer, telling me I was talented. That I deserved to live a life I loved even if they didn't understand. Ethan's thumb rubbed over my knuckles, pulling me back. "What's on your mind?" "I'm just thinking about her face when she sees me walk in," I whispered. "But I'm also thinking about Mom and Sabrina and the way they'll look at me." Ethan stayed silent, giving me space. I stood, walking to the window, looking down at the quiet street below. Austin had become my home, my refuge. I had built Carter Creative from nothing, hired 12 people, and just last week I was this close to signing a $500,000 branding deal with a venture capital firm. They didn't know any of that. To them, I was still the black sheep who ran away. I turned back to Ethan, who was watching me carefully, patient as always. His blue eyes steady, his expression calm. "If I go," I said, my voice firming, "I'm not going for them. I'm going for her." Ethan's lips curved into a small smile, one that reached his eyes. He stepped forward, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "And that's the only reason worth going for." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. The only reason worth going for. I knew it was true, but truth didn't make it easier. "I don't even know if she wants to see me," I whispered, opening my eyes to meet his. "What if she's disappointed in me?" Ethan shook his head, his hand still resting against my cheek. "June has never been disappointed in you, Nat. She's the one person who saw you for who you are." I leaned into his touch, remembering the way Grandma June would pull me aside during family dinners, slipping me a cookie or letting me sneak away to draw in her kitchen while everyone else talked about Sabrina's latest achievements. She would tell me in that warm, calm voice that I was enough just as I was. I pulled away, gently walking to the counter to grab my coffee. The steam curled into the morning light as I took a sip, letting the warmth settle my nerves for a moment. "You know they'll be there," I said, staring into my cup. "Mom, Sabrina." I can already hear the comments, the looks. Ethan stepped closer, pulling out a chair and sitting down. "You've built a life here, Nat. You have nothing to prove to them." I nodded, but the tightness in my chest didn't ease. "I know, but it's like I'm 17 again when I think about seeing them." Ethan let out a quiet laugh, not mocking, but soft. "That's what they do, Nat. But you're not 17. You're 30. You run a successful business. You're strong." I set the cup down, running my hand over the smooth counter. "They don't know that. To them, I'm still the disappointment who ran away." "Does it matter what they think?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. I hesitated, chewing on my bottom lip at number, but it feels like it does. Ethan stood, wrapping his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. His warmth, his steady breathing helped me find a small pocket of calm. "You're going for her, Nat. For Grandma June. Not for them." I leaned back into him, closing my eyes. "Yeah." We stood there for a while, letting the morning fill the silence. My phone buzzed on the counter, jolting me. I glanced down and saw Sabrina's name light up the screen, her name like a blade against my peace. I didn't answer. The phone rang until it stopped, leaving only the hum of the fridge and Ethan's steady breathing. "You okay?" he asked. I shook my head, letting out a breath. "I don't want to talk to her." "Then don't," he said simply. I turned to face him, searching his eyes for the fear I couldn't name. "What if going back ruins everything I've built here?" Ethan tilted his head, studying me. "What's the worst that could happen if you go?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Images flashed in my mind. Mom's disapproving frown. Sabrina's fake pity smile. The whispers of aunts and uncles I barely knew, all of them looking at me like I was the failure in the family. My stomach twisted, and I placed a hand against it, trying to breathe. Ethan stepped back, giving me space. "Natalie, what is it that you're really afraid of?" I swallowed hard, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm afraid they'll make me feel small again." Ethan didn't move, letting me say it out loud, letting it hang in the air. I wiped at a tear I hadn't noticed falling, taking a shaky breath. "I don't want to lose myself again." "You won't," Ethan said, his voice firm, pulling me back from the edge. "You've worked too hard, Nat. You're not that scared kid anymore." I nodded, pressing my lips together to keep them from trembling. "I need to see her," I finally said. "I need to see Grandma." Ethan's shoulders relaxed and he nodded. "Then we'll go." I looked up at him, hope flickering. His lips curved into a small, confident smile. "You think I'm letting you walk in there alone?" I let out a breath that turned into a small laugh, leaning into his chest, letting the safety of him wash over me for a moment. "Thank you," I whispered. "Always," he replied. We stood there, the morning sun painting the kitchen in soft gold. I looked at the invitation again, running my thumb over the gold lettering. A part of me was still terrified, but another part, the part Grandma June always believed in, was ready. Ethan pulled back just enough to look at me, his blue eyes calm and clear. His next words sliced through the quiet, pressing against the fear I hadn't named. "If you go, Nat, what are you most afraid will happen?" I didn't answer him right away. The question sat heavy between us, pressing against old scars I had tried to forget. I turned, walking to the window, pulling back the curtain to watch the morning traffic crawl past our building. My reflection stared back at me, hair tied in a messy bun, dark circles under my eyes, a reminder of how little sleep I had gotten since that envelope arrived. "I'm afraid," I finally said, my voice low, "that they'll make me feel worthless again." Ethan stayed quiet, letting me say it. Letting me feel it. "They always had a way of doing that," I whispered. "It didn't matter what I did, Ethan. Nothing was ever enough." I saw him nod in the reflection, his arms crossed, jaw tight. "Tell me," he said softly. So I let the memories come. I saw Mom standing in the kitchen, her lips pressed tight as she looked at my acceptance letter to the art program at Oregon State. "You really think this is a smart choice?" "Natalie," she had asked, her voice cold. "You can't eat paintings." I remembered looking down at the paper, excitement draining from my body replaced by that familiar heaviness in my chest. And Sabrina standing behind her smirking as she waved her acceptance letter from Lewis and Clark Law, Mom's eyes lighting up in a way they never did for me. "Now that's a real future," Mom had said, pulling Sabrina into a hug, leaving me clutching my letter alone. I blinked, the memory fading, but the ache in my chest remained. I turned back to Ethan, who was watching me with steady eyes. "Mom used to say I was too sensitive," I said. "That I needed to toughen up. That art was a hobby, not a life." Ethan's eyes softened, but he didn't move, letting me continue. "And Sabrina," I said, letting out a breath. She knew exactly how to twist the knife. Every time I won something, she would roll her eyes and tell me it didn't matter because it wasn't real. I closed my eyes, remembering the day I won the regional art competition in high school. My painting had been featured in the local newspaper, my teacher telling me I had real talent. At dinner that night, Mom had glanced at the paper, her lips tightening. "Don't let this get to your head," she had said, while Sabrina sighed dramatically, saying, "We get it, Natalie, you can draw." I had swallowed the hurt, pushing peas around my plate, trying not to let them see the tears burning in my eyes. Ethan moved, then stepping closer, taking my hands in his. His touch was warm, grounding. "You're not that girl anymore, Nat," he said, his voice steady. "You've built something amazing here." I nodded, blinking away the memory, letting the reality of now sink in. Carter Creative wasn't just a company, it was proof that I was more than what they said I was. "I just don't want to lose who I am," I whispered. "You won't," Ethan said, squeezing my hands. "You've come too far." I took a deep breath, letting his words settle the storm inside me. My eyes drifted to the whiteboard near my desk, covered in sketches and notes for the upcoming pitch with the venture capital firm. A pitch worth $500,000. A pitch I had earned. "I used to think I had to prove myself to them," I said quietly. "That if I became successful enough, they'd finally see me." Ethan shook his head, brushing his thumb across my knuckles. "You don't need their validation." I nodded, a small, tired smile pulling at my lips. "I know." The morning light had shifted, pouring into the kitchen, warming the cold tiles under my feet. I let go of his hands, walking to my desk, flipping open my planner. "I have a call with the team in an hour," I said, clearing my throat, pulling myself back into the present. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me with a soft smile. "You've got this." I glanced back at him, letting myself breathe, letting the quiet moment settle into something close to peace. My phone buzzed on the desk, pulling my attention. The screen lit up with a new message. It was from Sabrina. I stared at her name on the screen, my thumb hovering, heat rising in my chest. Sabrina. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, hadn't heard her voice since the last time she called to inform me that I was missing out on family moments. Her texts always came with that same sharp edge, wrapped in fake concern. I tapped the message, forcing myself to read it. "Don't forget Grandma's not getting younger. Not many birthdays left." I let out a breath, steadying my hands. My reflection in the dark screen was tight-lipped, eyes tired. It was always like this, with her soft words that somehow managed to feel like a blade. Ethan watched me, waiting. "What did she say?" I looked up, swallowing. "She's reminding me that Grandma's old." He raised an eyebrow, reading between the lines. "And reminding you that it's your fault if you don't show up." I nodded, setting the phone down on the desk. "Yeah." My mind pulled me back like it always did to the kitchen in that Portland house. Sabrina sitting at the counter, her long hair perfectly curled, Mom bustling around, praising her latest mock trial win at her law program. "Your sister has such a bright future," Mom had said, smiling as she poured Sabrina another cup of coffee. And there I was, 17 acceptance letter to the art program in my hand, hoping Mom would look at me like that just once. When I told her about the scholarship, Mom didn't even pause, didn't even look at the paper. She just sighed. "Art is nice, Natalie, but you can't live off doodles," she said, glancing at Sabrina, who smirked over the rim of her coffee cup. I remember the sting, the way I hid the letter in my sketchbook, later pressing it between the pages like it was something to be ashamed of. I swallowed, pulling myself back to the present. Ethan was still watching me, eyes soft, patient. "Mom used to say that a lot," I said, quietly picking at the edge of the desk. "That art wasn't real." "But it was real for you," Ethan said, stepping closer. I nodded, blinking fast. Grandma was the only one who told me it mattered. My voice cracked and I let out a breath. Grandma June, with her warm smile, her gentle hands that smelled like lavender soap, would pull me aside, flipping through my sketchbook. "You have a gift, Natalie," she would say, her eyes kind. "You deserve to go wherever you want to go." It was her words that carried me when Mom's voice tried to drown me out. It was her voice I heard when I packed my bags for Austin, leaving Portland with nothing but my sketchbooks and a hope that I could build a life on my own. "You did it," Nat Ethan said, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "You built something from nothing." I let out a small, shaky laugh. I remember the day I left, Sabrina made sure to announce her engagement. Ethan raised an eyebrow, letting out a breath. "Seriously?" "Yeah," I said, shaking my head, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. At my graduation dinner in front of everyone, Mom was so excited she forgot I was even there. Ethan swore under his breath, but I only shrugged. That's when I knew, I said softly. I couldn't stay there. I didn't want to be the shadow anymore. I looked around our apartment, the soft light pouring in, the sketches pinned to the wall, reminders of projects completed, clients won, a business built from the ground up. "I'm not that shadow anymore," I whispered. Ethan nodded, pride in his eyes. "No, you're not." I picked up my phone again, reading Sabrina's message one more time before locking the screen. The weight in my chest wasn't gone, but it was different now. It wasn't fear, it was something closer to resolve. I turned to Ethan, letting out a breath. "I'll go see Grandma." His smile was small, steady. "We'll book the flights." I nodded, letting the quiet settle again as I placed the phone back on the desk. The sun had shifted, pouring light across the floor, catching the edge of my sketchbook. And just as I reached for it, my phone buzzed again, Sabrina's name lighting up the screen. But this time the message was different. The message was short, almost careless in its tone. "Don't be late. Grandma wants you there on time." I stared at it, reading it again, trying to find the sharp edge I knew was there. It was the kind of message Sabrina sent when she wanted to sound helpful but meant to remind me I was the outsider coming back. I dropped the phone onto the desk, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My fingers brushed over my sketchbook, grounding myself in the present. Ethan walked in, holding his coffee, watching me. "Another one from her?" I nodded, rubbing my eyes. "Yeah." He set his mug down, crossing the room to stand in front of me. "She doesn't get to ruin this for you." I looked up at him, exhaustion pressing behind my eyes. "I know." Ethan reached for his laptop on the table. "Flights are booked," he said, glancing at me. "I got us a hotel close to your grandma's place." I blinked, the words settling in. "You didn't have to." He shook his head. "You're not staying at your mom's house. Not even for a minute." I let out a shaky laugh. "Yeah, I know." He leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee, watching me with that calm patience he always had. "What are you bringing for June?" I glanced at the canvas propped against the wall, still wrapped in brown paper. "A portrait," I said, walking over to it. "Of her at the lake last summer." Ethan smiled, his eyes softening. "She'll love that." I traced my fingers along the edge of the paper, remembering the day I took the reference photo. Grandma June in her sun hat, sitting by the water, her reflection rippling in the lake. She had looked at me and said, "This is the happiest I've been in a long time." I closed my eyes, holding onto that memory. That night, I packed my bag carefully. Clothes for a few days, my laptop, files for the branding pitch I needed to review on the plane, a folder of contracts that still needed signatures. I slid the wrapped portrait into a padded case, laying it gently on top. Ethan watched from the doorway, arms crossed, quiet. "You're still working?" I glanced up, pausing. "The pitch is next week. I can't drop it now." He nodded, stepping into the room, reaching for my hand. "I get it, just don't let them get in your head while you're there." I squeezed his hand, letting the warmth settle into me. "I'll try." We crawled into bed later, the room dark, except for the glow of the city lights outside. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I tried to focus on the clients, the designs waiting for final approval, the numbers I needed to check in the morning. But the past had a way of slipping in when the lights were off. I drifted into sleep, and the dream came fast. I was back at the dinner table in Portland, the heavy silence hanging between bites of overcooked chicken. Mom was across from me, her eyes sharp, judging. Sabrina sat beside her, a glass of wine in hand, smirking. "So Natalie," Mom said, her voice sweet and sharp, "what exactly do you do again?" "Draw little pictures." Sabrina laughed softly, tilting her head. "Is it even a real job?" I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My throat closed, my hands trembling in my lap. I could feel every eye on me, waiting, judging, amused. Mom's voice cut again. "It's time to grow up, Natalie." I tried to speak to defend myself, but the words were gone, stolen by the fear I thought I had left behind. I jolted awake, my chest tight, breath caught in my throat. The room was dark, the sheets tangled around me. Ethan stirred beside me, turning to face me in the darkness. "Nightmare." I nodded, unable to speak, tears pressing hot against my eyes. He reached for me, pulling me into his arms, his hand rubbing circles on my back. "You're not there anymore, Nat. You're here." I buried my face into his shoulder, letting the tears slip quietly. It felt so real. "I know," he whispered, pressing his lips to my hair. "But you're not that girl anymore." I held on to him, letting the shaking slow, letting his warmth remind me of who I had become. Of what I had built. Of why I was going. "You're going for her," Ethan whispered again, his voice steady. "Not for them." I pulled back just enough to see his face in the faint glow from the window. His eyes were clear, steady, the way they always were when I needed them most. "I know," I whispered, my voice rough. "I just need to remember that." He brushed a thumb across my cheek, catching the last tear before it fell. "You will." We lay back down, his arm around me, and I closed my eyes, forcing myself to focus on his heartbeat, letting it anchor me until I drifted into a restless sleep. Morning came too soon. I moved quietly through the apartment, folding clothes into my suitcase, each movement careful, deliberate, grounding. The soft thud of the zipper felt final as I closed the bag. Ethan was at the kitchen counter, laptop open, coffee steaming beside him. He glanced up, offering me a small smile. I confirmed our hotel. Close to June's place, 15 minutes tops. "Thank you," I said, adjusting the strap of my laptop bag on my shoulder. He closed his laptop, walking over to where the wrapped portrait leaned against the wall. He ran a hand over the paper, careful, like he was afraid to disturb it. "She's going to love this." I smiled, though it felt tight. "I hope so." Ethan looked at me, tilting his head. "You ready?" I nodded, but the truth was I wasn't sure I ever would be. I checked my planner, running through the mental list. Contracts for the branding pitch, my tablet loaded with the presentation, client files updated. I needed the work with me, needed the reminder that I was more than the scared girl they tried to keep small. Ethan grabbed the handle of my suitcase, pulling it toward the door, pausing to look back at me. "Laptop chargers, contracts. All in here," I said, tapping my laptop bag. "Good," he said, opening the door, letting in a rush of cool morning air. We moved through the motions, quietly loading the car, locking the door, heading toward the airport. The city was just waking up, the sky a pale gray, the streets empty except for a few early risers jogging past. At the airport, we moved through security, found our gate, settled into the uncomfortable chairs with coffees in hand. I opened my laptop, pulling up the client files, forcing myself to focus. But every few minutes, my eyes drifted to the wrapped portrait leaning against Ethan's bag, a reminder of why I was going. The boarding call came, pulling me from the screen. We stood, gathered our bags, moved with the small crowd toward the gate. Ethan squeezed my hand before we stepped onto the plane. Deep breaths. I nodded, inhaling slowly, holding it, letting it out as we found our seats. The plane lifted, the city shrinking below us, the clouds swallowing everything in soft white. I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the hum of the engines drown out, the thoughts clawing at the edges of my mind. We landed in Portland just before noon. The air felt different as we stepped outside, damp, cool, carrying that scent of pine and rain that I had missed and hated all at once. We found the rental car, loaded our bags, and began the quiet drive toward the hotel. I watched the familiar streets pass by each corner, holding a memory I didn't want to revisit. The hotel was small, modern, the kind of place that felt temporary in a comforting way. We checked in, moved our bags to the room, and stood in the middle of the quiet space for a moment. Ethan looked at me, his hand brushing against mine. "We're here for her, nothing else." I nodded, setting my laptop on the desk, pulling out the contracts, arranging them in a neat stack, aligning my pens, forcing the world into order. The portrait leaned against the wall waiting. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at it, trying to imagine Grandma's smile when she saw it, the way her eyes would light up, how she would reach for my hand and tell me she was proud. A small comfort. I stood moving to the window, watching the rain begin to fall, tapping softly against the glass. My phone buzzed on the table behind me. I turned, walking over, picking it up, the screen lighting up with a number I didn't recognize. A single text. "Everyone will know who you really are at the party." My fingers tightened around the phone, the message burning into my skin. "Everyone will know who you really are at the party." I stared at it, letting the words sink in before locking the screen and setting the phone down. My chest was tight, but I forced myself to take a breath. Ethan stepped out of the bathroom, towel around his neck, his hair damp. "Everything okay?" he asked, reading the look on my face. I shook my head once. "Just another message." He paused, searching my eyes, then nodded slowly. "Do you want to talk about it later?" I said, forcing my voice steady. The rain had stopped by the time we left the hotel, the sky still gray, heavy clouds pressing low. We drove in silence, the streets familiar but foreign, each corner pulling pieces of memory I didn't want to hold. The house came into view exactly the same as it had been the day I left. White paint, black shutters, the garden perfectly trimmed, the walkway lined with lavender bushes. It was like nothing had changed, like the world inside those walls had been frozen in time, waiting for me to walk back in. Ethan parked, glancing at me. "You ready?" "No," I said, exhaling. "But let's go." We stepped out, the cool air brushing against my skin. I pulled the wrapped portrait closer to my chest, feeling the edges press into my palms. Neighbors were gathered in the yard, holding paper cups, laughing, eyes shifting as we walked up the path. A woman I barely recognized leaned toward another, whispering, eyes flicking to me. I heard the edge of her words. "She's the one who left, right? Thought she was too good for them." I kept walking, each step careful on the stone path, the smell of wet grass rising around us. The front door opened before I could knock, and there she was. Sabrina. Her hair was curled, makeup perfect, a sleek black dress hugging her frame, diamond earrings catching the light. Her eyes met mine, cold, a small smirk pulling at the corner of her lips. "Natalie," she said, her voice dripping false warmth. "You made it." I kept my face neutral, nodding once. "Of course." Her eyes dropped to the package in my arms, then back to my face, eyebrows lifting slightly. "How thoughtful." Before I could answer, Mom appeared behind her, her hair pinned back, a string of pearls at her neck, a glass of white wine in her hand. Her eyes scanned over me, pausing, lips pressing together before curving into a tight smile. "Oh, Natalie," she said, stepping back. Well, you look fine." I forced a small smile. "Hi, Mom." She stepped aside, gesturing us in. Come in, people are waiting." The air inside was warm, heavy, with the smell of lemon polish and the faint scent of the roast in the oven. I stepped into the living room, the walls lined with family photos. Sabrina's graduation. Sabrina's engagement. Sabrina's baby shower. Not a single photo of me. A cluster of relatives turned, eyes bright with curiosity, smiles too sharp to be genuine. "Well, if it isn't Natalie, Uncle," Rob said, his voice too loud. "Heard you moved down south, huh?" I nodded once. "Austin." He raised an eyebrow. "Doing what exactly?" I shifted the package in my arms, meeting his eyes calmly. "Running my company." A pause. A flicker of something in his eyes before he laughed, patting my shoulder. "Well, good for you." I moved past him, feeling the eyes follow the whispers, starting again. Ethan stayed close, his hand brushing against mine. And then she appeared. Grandma June, walking slowly, her hands gripping her cane, her eyes bright, clear, warm. She stopped when she saw me, her face breaking into a smile that lit up the room. "Oh, my girl," she said, reaching out a hand. I stepped forward, setting the portrait down carefully before taking her hand, bending down to press my forehead against hers. Her skin smelled like lavender and warmth. "I missed you, Grandma," I whispered. She squeezed my hand. "I never doubted you for a second, Natalie." I closed my eyes, letting her words settle in my chest, grounding me. Behind me, I felt eyes watching the rustle of fabric as Sabrina moved closer, her phone in her hand, tapping the screen with her manicured nails, her laughter low as she leaned in to whisper something to Aunt Karen, both of them glancing at me. I straightened, lifting my chin, pulling my hand gently from Grandma's standing beside Ethan as the voices swirled around us. I was here. That was enough. Sabrina's heels clicked across the hardwood as she circled the room, her perfume leaving a sharp floral trail. She leaned into air-kiss Aunt Karen, whispered something into Uncle Rob's ear, both of them turning to glance at me with small knowing smiles. Ethan's hand brushed mine, grounding me. I let out a slow breath, letting the whispers roll off me like water. Mom appeared with a tray of drinks, smiling with that tightness around her eyes. She handed me a glass of sparkling water, her gaze sliding over me before returning to Sabrina. "Oh, Natalie, you look well," she said, her voice falsely bright. I forced a polite smile. "Thanks, Mom." She turned away before I could say more, calling out to a neighbor, her laughter too loud, too forced. I sipped the water, tasting the bitterness of the lemon slice floating in it, my eyes moving around the room. Every photo, every vase, every detail was the same as the day I left. Nothing had changed, but everything felt smaller now. "Is it true you're living in Texas now?" Aunt Karen asked, stepping closer, wine glass in hand. "Yes," I said simply. "Must be hard." She continued, her voice dripping fake concern. "I heard you left. Rather suddenly." I held her gaze steady. "I'm doing well in Austin." Her eyebrows lifted, a small condescending smile on her lips. "That's good. We all worried, you know." "Thank you," I said, my voice calm, final. She hesitated, then turned away, her expression faltering. Across the room, I saw Sabrina watching, the corner of her mouth lifting in a cold smirk. She tapped her phone again, eyes flicking up to mine as if daring me to look away. Grandma June's voice broke through the tension, warm and clear. "Natalie," she called, her hand reaching for me. "Come sit by me." I moved to her side, kneeling carefully, taking her hand in mine. Her skin was soft, her eyes bright as she studied my face. "You're here," she said, her voice full of quiet pride. "I told you I would be," I replied, squeezing her hand. She patted my cheek gently. "I never doubted you." Behind us, chairs scraped against the floor as Mom called everyone to the table. "Dinner is ready," she announced, forcing a bright smile. "Let's all sit." The dining table was long, covered in a white cloth, candles flickering in tall holders, plates set with polished silverware. I took my seat beside Ethan, across from Sabrina, who settled into her chair with practiced elegance, her phone resting beside her plate. Mom bustled around, adjusting the napkins, checking the glasses, forcing laughter with the neighbors as they found their seats. The clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversation filled the room as everyone settled. I glanced at Ethan, who gave me a small nod, his hand brushing against mine under the table. I let the warmth of it steady me, reminding me why I was here. Grandma June was seated at the head of the table, her eyes moving over each of us, pausing on me with a soft smile before shifting back to the room. Just as everyone began to quiet, Sabrina cleared her throat loud enough to pull all eyes to her. She leaned back in her chair, a small satisfied smile on her lips as she glanced around the table. Her hand rested on her phone, tapping it lightly, a glint of excitement in her eyes. "Grandma," Sabrina said, her voice smooth, practiced. "Before we eat, I have a special gift for you." She paused, letting the silence build, her eyes sliding to mine, locking there unblinking. "It's something," she continued, her smile widening, "that has to do with Natalie." A hush fell over the table, the soft clink of forks pausing midair. Grandma's eyes darted between Sabrina and me, confusion flickering across her face. "What is this about, Sabrina?" Sabrina's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just a little truth, Grandma. You deserve that." She lifted her hand, snapping her fingers toward the hallway. The front door opened and a man in a dark suit stepped inside, carrying a thick black folder tucked under his arm. My heart slammed so hard I thought the entire table could hear it. He walked in with the calm of someone used to uncomfortable rooms, eyes scanning the table before settling on Sabrina, giving her a small nod. "This is Mr. Marcus," Sabrina announced, her voice sweet and sharp all at once. "A private investigator." A ripple of whispers moved through the table. Aunt Karen leaned toward Uncle Rob, her eyes bright with the promise of drama. Mom lifted her glass, taking a slow sip, her lips curling into a small cold smile as she watched me. I felt Ethan's hand slide over mine under the table, squeezing. I gripped back hard, my breath caught in my chest. "What is the meaning of this?" Grandma asked, her voice shaking slightly. Sabrina patted her hand, condescending, her eyes flicking to me again. "It's for your protection, Grandma. I couldn't let you be lied to." My jaw tightened, my nails digging into Ethan's palm, but I kept my face still, refusing to give Sabrina the reaction she wanted. The man Marcus cleared his throat, stepping forward. He opened the folder, pulling out a stack of papers, the pages thick and heavy in his hands. Ethan leaned in, his lips close to my ear. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "You fought too hard to back down now." I swallowed, forcing the rising panic back down. Sabrina stood, moving to the center of the room, her phone still in her hand, as if ready to record every second. Her confidence was thick, her smile smug as she turned back to face the table. "You all think Natalie's done so well for herself," she began, letting the words hang, her eyes sweeping over the room, pausing on each curious face. Aunt Karen's eyes widened. Uncle Rob leaned forward, his elbows on the table, eager. Mom set her glass down with a soft clink, folding her hands together, watching me with that cold calculation I knew too well. "But the truth," Sabrina said, her voice softening for effect, "isn't always what it seems." Marcus shifted the papers in his hands, clearing his throat again, preparing to speak. Across the table, Grandma reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. I turned to her, meeting her gaze, seeing the fear, the confusion, and the quiet strength that had always been there. "It's okay," I mouthed to her, even if I didn't fully believe it. Sabrina crossed her arms, tilting her head, her eyes glittering. She was enjoying this, feeding off the tension in the room, the attention, the power. Marcus finally lifted his gaze, his voice calm, professional, as he addressed the table. "Over the past 3 months," he said, "I have conducted a thorough investigation into the personal and professional life of Natalie Carter." A heavy silence fell over the table, the only sound the soft hiss of the radiator against the cold Portland air. Sabrina's smile widened as she turned to the relatives, her eyes alive with anticipation. "Go ahead, Mr. Marcus." Mom crossed her legs, folding her hands, her gaze sharp as she leaned back in her chair, watching me like a hawk. Aunt Karen shifted closer, her phone in her hand, already recording. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my hand gripping Ethan's under the table. He squeezed back, steady, solid, grounding me as I forced myself to keep breathing. Marcus adjusted the folder, pulling out the top page, his eyes scanning the words before lifting them to the room. "I reviewed financial statements, business filings, and property records," he said, voice even. "Conducted interviews and direct observation." He paused, letting the words settle, the silence thick, almost suffocating. Sabrina tilted her head, feigning sympathy as she glanced at Grandma. "I just didn't want you to get hurt, Grandma." Grandma's eyes flickered with confusion, her hand gripping the armrest, her gaze darting between me and Marcus. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. "Let him finish." Marcus nodded, flipping to the next page, his tone still professional. "Natalie Carter currently resides in Austin, Texas, in a purchased condo valued at $850,000. The room shifted, a few gasps breaking the silence. He continued. "She owns and operates Carter Creative, an independent branding and design agency with 12 full-time employees." Sabrina's face flickered, her lips parting, confusion slipping past her composure for half a second before she recovered. Marcus lifted another page. "Last year, her company reported over $3 million in gross revenue with major contracts with national clients." Mom's wine glass slipped slightly in her hand, the liquid sloshing near the rim as she tried to keep her face blank. Uncle Rob cleared his throat, leaning back, eyes wide. $3 million, Marcus nodded once. "All information has been verified with financial documentation and client testimony." Sabrina's face was pale now, her fingers tightening around her phone, the screen lighting up with her grip. Marcus set the papers down carefully on the table, his eyes meeting each person in the room before returning to Sabrina. "You hired me to find evidence of deception," he said calmly. "There is none." The silence was deafening, the ticking of the old clock in the hallway the only sound. I felt Ethan's hand squeeze mine again, his thumb brushing across my skin, warmth rushing back into my body. Grandma let out a breath. I didn't know she was holding her eyes, turning to me, tears glistening as she smiled, her hand lifting, reaching for me across the table. Sabrina's lips parted, a small strangled sound escaping as she stood the chair, scraping harshly against the floor. "This can't be right," she said, her voice rising, cracking. "Check again." Marcus raised an eyebrow, unbothered. "Everything has been cross-checked." Mom's face was tight, her jaw clenched, her eyes cutting to Sabrina, then to me, then back to her wine glass. Sabrina's hands were shaking now, her phone dropping to the table with a soft thud, the screen going dark. Marcus gathered the papers, calmly stacking them before looking back at the room. "These are the results," he said, his voice final, steady. He paused, letting the moment land before he spoke again, his eyes shifting directly to Grandma. "Natalie Carter," he said, his voice clear, "is exactly who she says she is." The silence after felt like the loudest sound I had ever heard. Sabrina's smirk shattered, her eyes blinking fast, her fingers frozen around her phone. "That's not," she started, her voice trembling thin. Marcus didn't look at her. "The findings are clear." Mom's eyes flicked sharply to Sabrina, her jaw clenching, confusion shifting into something darker. Her fingers tightened around her wine glass, setting it down with a clink as she swallowed hard. Aunt Karen lowered her phone, avoiding eye contact. Uncle Rob exhaled, shaking his head. "Well, I'll be damned." Ethan's hand pressed firmly against my back, warm, reminding me I was here in my truth, no matter who tried to take it. Sabrina's lips parted again, her voice cracking. I was only trying to protect Grandma from lies." "Don't lie to me, Sabrina." Grandma's voice cut through, shaking but firm as steel I had seen in her only a few times. "You wanted to humiliate her." Sabrina's shoulders curled inward, her perfect posture shrinking as she tried to hide behind her hair, her screen lighting up and going dark as her fingers tapped it uselessly. Marcus lifted his tablet, tapping the screen. The television flickered, coming alive with bright images. Me in the Carter Creative office, surrounded by my team's smiles and confetti raining down during a product launch. A video clip of me stepping onto a stage in Austin, shaking hands, holding an award, the lights catching on my hair as I grinned alive. Another clip, me on a business panel, speaking with calm confidence. My voice filled the room. Success isn't about proving them wrong, it's about becoming who you know you are. The room was frozen, all eyes on the screen. No one dared to look at me. I could see Mom swallowing, blinking too fast, her lips parting, unable to form words. Sabrina's breath hitched, tears slipping down her cheeks as she shook her head, whispering, "No, no, no." Marcus kept reading, his tone even professional. Carter Creative generated over $3 million in revenue last year, working with national venture funds and managing high-value contracts without legal or financial issues. The words echoed, filling every corner of the dining room that had once felt like a cage to me. Aunt Karen's husband whispered. 3 million. Sabrina's mascara was smudged now, her tears streaking down her cheeks, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as she shook her head again, whispering, "No, this can't be what you found." "It is," Marcus said, calmly lowering the tablet. Grandma's hands came up to her mouth, tears rolling, her shoulders trembling as she looked at me with pride that shone brighter than any light in that room. "I always knew," she whispered, her voice breaking, her smile unshakable. Ethan's hand slid from my back to my shoulder, squeezing, gently grounding me in the warmth, reminding me that I didn't owe anyone in this room an explanation. I lifted my chin, letting them see me, letting them see that the woman standing before them wasn't the girl who once shrank at their judgment. Grandma pressed her hands on the table, pushing herself up, her voice trembling but strong as she looked around the room. "Natalie," she said, her eyes locked on mine, "tell them what you've built." I stood, the chair scraping softly against the floor as I rose, letting the silence fill every corner. All eyes were on me, the same eyes that once looked past me, through me, as if I didn't matter. Now they waited, some wide with shock, others narrowed with judgment, some simply tired, but they were all looking. Grandma's hand was still on the table, her knuckles pale but her eyes bright, urging me, believing in me the way she always had. I took a breath, steady, letting the air ground me, letting the years of fighting for every inch of my freedom hold me up now. "I built Carter Creative 3 years ago," I said, my voice calm, clear. "I started with one client while working nights, saving every dollar, pouring it back into the business." Sabrina's face was blotchy, her mascara streaking as she shook her head, whispering, "No, you're lying." "I'm not," I said, turning to her, meeting her eyes without blinking. I worked for every contract, every dollar, every late night, every early morning. I built something that matters. The television screen shifted again, showing a clip of my team gathered in the office, balloons overhead, the words 3M revenue on a cake as they cheered, laughing, hugging each other. I pointed to the screen, not looking away from Sabrina. We didn't just build a business, we built a place where people are seen, valued, and heard. Mom's face was pale, her lips pressed tight, her eyes darting between me and the screen, fighting whatever words she wanted to say. Aunt Karen wiped at her eyes, shaking her head, whispering, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said softly, turning back to the room. "None of you ever asked." Grandma's eyes were glistening, a tear rolling down her cheek as she smiled, her hands trembling as she pressed them together. Ethan stepped closer, his hand resting on my shoulder, steady, warm, the anchor I needed as I continued. "I've signed national contracts with venture funds," I said, my voice stronger now, helping startups tell their stories, helping women-owned businesses find their place in the market. Last year we closed over $3 million in revenue debt-free with a team of 12 full-time employees. Uncle Rob let out a low whistle, shaking his head, his eyes wide. That's something, Natalie." Sabrina's hands were trembling, her phone clattering to the table as she tried to speak, her voice cracking. "No, you're just pretending." "No, Sabrina," I said quietly, firmly. "You wanted me to fail so you could feel better about yourself." Her eyes snapped up to mine, fury and shame warring across her face, her mouth opening and closing with no sound. Marcus closed the folder, setting it down with finality. "There is no fraud, no hidden debt, no secrets. Only a successful woman who did what she said she did." The room was silent again, thick with everything that had been said, everything that had never been said. Grandma reached out, taking my hand, her fingers soft and warm around mine, squeezing as tears fell freely down her cheeks. "I am so proud of you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Mom's eyes met mine for a moment, something unreadable there, something like regret, before she looked away, her shoulders curling and small. Sabrina sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, the tension of her perfect facade crumbling in front of everyone. I let the silence hold, let the truth sit there in the air where it belonged. Then, just as I began to exhale, thinking it was finally over, the front door opened with a slow creak. And a tall man in a dark suit stepped in, scanning the room, holding a single envelope in his hand. "Delivery for Natalie Carter," he said, his voice deep, even carrying through the stunned room. I stepped forward, my heels quiet on the hardwood, reaching for the envelope. The man gave me a small nod, then turned and left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. All eyes were on me as I turned the envelope over in my hands, the paper thick, my name written in careful script. My fingers tore the seal, pulling out a single sheet of paper, my breath steady as I scanned the words. It was a letter from one of my clients, a thank you note for our last campaign, praising the work, telling me how it had saved their business, how it gave them hope. I let out a soft breath, folding the letter carefully, slipping it back into the envelope. And I looked up. Mom was watching me, her eyes narrowed, her mouth tight, but she didn't speak. Sabrina's eyes were red, her shoulders hunched, her hands twisting in her lap. I didn't wait for them to speak first. "I didn't leave this family," I said, my voice clear, strong. "I left the way this family treated me." Sabrina's breath caught her head, lifting, her lips parting. "You think you're better than us?" "No," I said, shaking my head, meeting her gaze without blinking. "I don't think I'm better. I just know I deserve respect." A hush fell, the weight of my words settling over the room like a blanket. "I worked nights while building my business," I continued, my voice steady. "I worked while others slept, while others doubted me, while others called me foolish." I saw Aunt Karen wipe at her eyes, saw Uncle Rob nod slowly. "I was rejected more times than I can count," I said, letting the memory of those nights flicker behind my eyes, the fear, the exhaustion, the small victories that kept me going. But I didn't stop, and when I signed my first client, it wasn't luck, it was because I earned it. Sabrina let out a shaky breath, tears slipping down her face. "You were always jealous of me, Natalie." I let out a soft laugh, not cruel, just tired. "I was never jealous of you, Sabrina. I just wanted you to see me. To see that I wasn't here to make you look better." She pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking. I turned, looking at the room, at the faces that had whispered about me, judged me, written me off. "I didn't build this for you," I said softly. "I built this for me." Grandma June's hand reached out, gripping mine, her touch warm, grounding. Her eyes were shining, her smile, small but proud. "You've shown them who you are," she whispered, her voice cracking. Aunt Karen's voice was quiet. "Natalie, I'm sorry. I didn't know." "It's okay," I said gently. "Now you do." The room was thick with silence, uncomfortable, heavy, but honest. I turned finally to face Mom. Her eyes were hard, her jaw tight, but she didn't look away. And I said, "I don't need your approval anymore." Mom's lips parted, but no words came out, her eyes flickering with something like disbelief, something like fear. I held her gaze steady, letting her see. I wasn't the girl who used to beg for her approval, the girl who would shrink at a sigh or a sharp word. I was done shrinking. Sabrina let out a shaky breath, her voice raw. "You think you're so perfect now." "Natalie," I turned to her, meeting her eyes calmly. "No, I don't think I'm perfect, but I know I'm not your shadow." Her face crumpled, tears rolling down her cheeks. "You always wanted what I had. The attention, the praise." I shook my head slowly. "I didn't want your attention, Sabrina. I wanted respect. I wanted to be seen." Her shoulders shook as she buried her face in her hands, muffling a sob. I took a breath, letting it fill the room with my truth. "When I left, I said, my voice, even I wasn't leaving the family. I was leaving the way you treated me." Aunt Karen wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice small. "Natalie, we didn't know." "I know," I said softly, glancing at her. "But now you do." I felt Grandma's hand grip mine, warm, strong, despite the tremble in her fingers. "You've shown them, baby," she whispered, her eyes shining. "You've shown them you can stand on your own." I smiled at her, a real smile, letting her see how much her faith in me had mattered, how it had saved me. The room was silent, except for Sabrina's quiet sobs, the hush, heavy, raw, but honest. I worked nights, I continued, letting them see it, feel it. I worked when I was exhausted, when I was terrified of failing, when every rejection felt like proof I was nothing. They were listening now. Really listening. But I didn't stop, I said, my voice firm, letting it land. "I signed my first client, then my second. I hired my first employee, then my 10th. I built something I'm proud of." Mom's eyes glistened, but she quickly blinked the tears back, her jaw tightening again. "You always wanted to be the victim," she said, her voice sharp but weaker than I had ever heard it. "No," I said, calmly, shaking my head. "I just wanted to be free." She flinched just slightly and looked away, her hands twisting together in her lap. A hush settled thick, the truth finally out in the open, undeniable. Then Grandma stood, her frame small, but her presence filling the room, her voice trembling but clear. "Everyone here sees you now, Natalie," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "And I am so proud of the woman you've become." I swallowed, my throat tight as I squeezed her hand back. Sabrina lifted her head, her eyes swollen, mascara streaking down her face. "I didn't know," she whispered, broken. "I didn't know you felt like that." I nodded once. "Now you do." She let out a sob, covering her face again, the weight of it all finally crashing over her. I looked around the room at the faces that once saw me as a disappointment, as a shadow, as less. They were seeing me now. And then I turned back to Mom, lifting my chin, letting her see the final truth. "I don't need your approval anymore," I repeated, letting it land. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the doorbell rang, echoing through the tense, quiet house. The doorbell echoed again, sharp, cutting through the heavy silence. Mom turned toward it, her face pale, but she didn't move. No one did. Ethan stepped forward, opening the door with calm ease, letting in the sound of the wind brushing past the hedges outside. It was a delivery driver holding a small box, the last of Grandma's ordered decorations that had arrived too late for the party. He handed it over, nodded, and left. The door shut softly, final. Mom let out a shaky breath, turning away without a word, walking down the hallway, her shoulders rigid, disappearing around the corner. Sabrina wiped her face, smudged mascara on her hands, and stood, her eyes darting around the room, landing on each family member before falling to the floor. "I need to go," she whispered, her voice cracking. No one stopped her. She grabbed her purse, her heels tapping across the hardwood, and the front door opened, then closed, leaving the air emptier, cleaner somehow. I felt Grandma squeeze my hand, her grip firm despite the tremor in her fingers. "I am so proud of you, Natalie," she whispered, tears in her eyes, her smile soft but certain. I turned to her, swallowing hard, letting that warmth sink in, letting it replace years of cold doubt. "Thank you for always believing in me," I said, my voice quiet, steady. She nodded once, patting my hand. "You were meant to fly, baby." The party ended quietly, people filtering out with awkward smiles, gentle nods, a few soft apologies whispered as they left. Uncle Rob squeezed my shoulder, whispering, "You did good, kid." Aunt Karen hugged me, holding on longer than I expected, her perfume familiar, comforting in a way I hadn't felt in years. When the house emptied, the lights dimmed and the dishes were cleared, Ethan and I stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against my skin, sharp, real. We loaded our bags into the car, the quiet hum of the engine, the only sound as we pulled away from the house, the streetlights flickering past, the city falling away behind us. I looked back once, the house growing smaller in the mirror, the weight of it finally lifting from my shoulders. Ethan reached over, lacing his fingers with mine, squeezing gently. "You did it," he said softly, his eyes on the road, a small smile on his lips. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, leaning back into the seat, letting the feeling of freedom settle deep in my bones. Back in Austin, the sun felt warmer, the air clearer, the city alive in a way I could finally see. My team greeted me with smiles, laughter, updates about projects, new contracts signed while I was gone. Carter Creative thrived, growing, a testament to every hard choice, every late night, every risk. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the city in gold, Ethan pulled me onto the balcony of our apartment. He took my hands, his eyes bright, steady, unwavering. "You've won, Natalie," he said, his voice soft, sure. Then he dropped to one knee, a small, simple ring in his hand, the light catching on the metal, glinting. "Will you let me keep standing by you for every fight, every victory, every quiet morning?" after he asked. Tears blurred the city lights, and I nodded, laughter and tears mixing as I whispered, "Yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger, pulling me into his arms as the wind lifted around us, carrying away the last pieces of fear I once held. The city lights sparkled below us as Ethan held me, the cool breeze brushing against my skin. I leaned back just enough to see his face, the quiet pride there, the love, the certainty. We stayed there for a long moment, letting the noise of the world fade, letting this new chapter begin without rush. The next morning, I walked into the office, the smell of coffee and fresh paint grounding me as my team lifted their heads, smiles spreading across their faces. "Welcome back, boss," Mia said, handing me a coffee, her eyes bright. I smiled, looking around the space we had built, desks covered in sketches, screens filled with campaign plans, the hum of energy I had once only dreamed of creating. We signed 2 new contracts that week, one with a national wellness brand, another with a women-led tech startup, each handshake a quiet promise that what we were building mattered. Late one evening, I sat on the balcony again, the ring cool on my finger, the lights of Austin pulsing like a heartbeat. Ethan stepped out, handing me his phone, the screen open to an email titled "Podcast Guest Invitation." "They want your story," he said, his eyes soft, proud. I let out a breath, nerves and excitement mixing, then nodded. "It's time." 2 weeks later, I sat in a small studio, the microphone close, my hands steady as I shared everything. The late nights, the failures, the fear, the victories, the day I chose myself, the day I stopped needing permission to exist. The podcast episode aired on Women Who Rise, and within hours messages flooded in from women across the country. They wrote about mothers who never saw them, sisters who used them as shadows, families who demanded smallness to feel big. They told me they cried, they cheered, they felt seen for the first time. One message read, "I walked away from my toxic family today after hearing your story. Thank you." I closed my eyes, letting the tears slip down my cheeks, letting the truth settle in a way it never had before. This was never about revenge. It was about freedom. About breaking the cycle. About living without fear. Ethan wrapped his arms around me from behind, pressing a kiss to the side of my head. "You didn't just win, Natalie," he whispered. "You changed everything." I turned in his arms, resting my forehead against his, the city lights blurring behind us, the future open, waiting. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments.